Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us in part 2 of Women NC and NCCASA's Critical Conversations, a part of our work during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. This Lunch and Learn will focus on sex trafficking in North Carolina. We're so glad all of you have joined us. We are so very glad to welcome our expert panelists. Thank you all for joining us. A few notes of housekeeping for those of you on Facebook Live. We will be taking questions from the audience a bit later on in the presentation. So as the presentation goes along, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. Our social media manager, Ava Smith, is monitoring that chat box, and we will turn to her later on in the program so that you can ask your questions of our panelists. So please do that. Ava has also put in the chat box a really quick Google form for you to fill out. You will know who all of us are, and we'd like to know who you are. So if you wouldn't mind taking about 30 seconds and putting your, just filling out that Google form, we would really appreciate it and know who you are. There's also a space in there for you to tell us what other topics you would like Women NC and NCCASA to talk about in future Lunch and Learns. So I think that's all I have to say about housekeeping. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Maria Murray Ryman, and I'm Executive Director of Women NC. And once again, so glad that all of you can join us for this part 2 of our critical conversations, sex trafficking in North Carolina. Without any more introductory words, let me tell you a few words about each of our panelists that you will hear from today. First, let me introduce Courtney Dunkerton from NCCASA. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with that acronym, NCCASA is the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Courtney Dunkerton is an anti-human trafficking specialist for NCCASA, where she develops and delivers training and technical assistance to rape crisis centers, dual domestic violence agencies, and human trafficking programs statewide. Courtney also serves as the Regional Response Team Coordinator for the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and we'll have a member from that organization here joining us. And she's also a member of the Team to Reach project that is creating and implementing a sex trafficking prevention curriculum that aligns with the North Carolina health education standards. She's authored and co-authored several publications around serving survivors of human trafficking. Prior to her work at NCCASA, Courtney co-founded and directed a nonprofit dedicated to advocacy, education, and the provision of victim services to survivors of human trafficking. This work included developing a mentoring program for at-risk youth, at-risk youth, and devising protocols and delivering training for first responders and direct service providers. Courtney has also served as the Human Trafficking Program Director and Child Forensic Interviewer for Crossroads Sexual Assault Response and Resource Center. Courtney, like most of actually all of our panelists here today, except for me, that is truly an expert in this work. Our next panelist is Karika Yarbo-Smith with the North Carolina Council for Women. Karika is the program director of all the human trafficking programs at the Council for Women and Youth Involvement, and has over 18 years of combined experience working in the areas of mental health, developmental disabilities, substance abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. Karika has provided outreach, direct services, resources, and referrals to survivors of violence. In addition to her work at the Council for Women, Karika also wears many other hats. In addition to being a panelist with us today, she serves as a consultant for the Office for Victims of Crime at the U.S. Department of Justice. She serves as a faculty member for the nonprofit Futures Without Violence, and is a consultant for the Office on Trafficking in Persons within the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So Karika works with us in North Carolina, but she also has a voice at the national level, and we appreciate her being with us today. Thanks, Karika. Next, we have Nancy Hagan of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, where she is the coordinator of training and technical assistance at the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. She previously served as senior human trafficking analyst with something called Project No Rest, which is a grant-funded anti-human trafficking initiative based at UNC's School of Social Work. Nancy developed expertise in anti-trafficking through 20 years of leadership in community-based efforts that allied with farm workers, immigrants, and rural residents of an underserved area in North Carolina. She also has expertise in identification, awareness, and response to both sex and labor trafficking, with a particular focus on labor trafficking of vulnerable people who are foreign nationals. Nancy earned an undergraduate degree in human development and education from Connecticut College, a master's degree in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard University, and a doctorate in adult education and human development from Cornell. She serves on boards at the local, state, and national level, and has received a number of recognitions for her work with underserved communities. Thank you, Nancy, for lending your expertise to us today. We really appreciate it. And finally, let me introduce Lala Appleberry of the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Lala is a native of Boston, and for more than 9 years, Lala worked at My Life Choice with minor victims, that is minor in age, minor victims of sex trafficking, where she provided direct service case management and mentoring. Lala has over 12 years of experience consulting, advising, and training organizations, law enforcement, medical personnel, school faculty, and media on how to work with survivors. Being a survivor of domestic sex trafficking herself, Lala understands that in order to do survivor-centered work, it must be survivor-led, and she has taken this belief and turned it into action. Lala holds a master's degree from Boston College and is licensed as a clinical social worker. She has been a keynote speaker at numerous events around the country to use her experience and knowledge to help providers provide trauma-informed care. In Lala's current role at the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, NCCAHT, she serves as the Survivor Network Coordinator. In this role, she's developing survivor-led, survivor-centered programming for the state of North Carolina. Lala, thanks for being with us. We appreciate your time and expertise. Now, let me see. Let me get out of this stop share and go right into the panelists. I'd like to give each one of our panelists time to tell us what they believe are important pieces of information for all of us to know about human trafficking. And so I'm going to kind of do a round robin, and I'm going to start with Courtney. Courtney Dunkerton, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. I'm really happy to lift up Sexual Assault Awareness Month as we think about the intersection of sexual violence and human trafficking. And just briefly, I want to mention those in sort of a bullet list fashion. Those intersections would involve coerced sex work for adults, any commercial sex with minors, a means to establish power and control, to threaten, to punish, to coerce, and dominate. So those are the ways it shows up. Human trafficking in North Carolina is no respecter of persons. It occurs in every county, rural and urban, among all demographics, and within a multitude of industries, legitimate and underground. But unlike the sexual violence movement, the response in the last decade to this human rights violation has not been survivor-led, but the result of concerned community members who stepped up to the plate with the information they had at the time and raised awareness, lobbied for funding, and founded advocacy and victim service organizations. And although survivors of human trafficking have always been served within the sexual violence field, human trafficking advocacy as we know it currently began when the human trafficking or HT label was attached to it. NCCASA has been a leader in the movement from that beginning. In 2004, NCCASA, along with the North Carolina Attorney General's Office, convened an interdisciplinary meeting to address the problem of human trafficking. One of the outcomes of that meeting was Ripple was created. Another outcome of this meeting was North Carolina eventually being recognized as one of 42 national specialized task forces in the US. NCCASA was funded to provide support victim response efforts through Ripple. Ripple eventually became NCCAHT as organization that was mentioned earlier, with NCCASA incubating NCCAHT from that time and continues to as NCCAHT builds capacity and grows. Our executive director served on the Human Trafficking Commission, and our associate director was board chair of NCCAHT and is now treasurer, and also served on Project No Rest, we heard about earlier. The anti-human trafficking movement in North Carolina has received a lot of attention and funding, with that funding being directed toward organizations that provide critical services to survivors, and also to collaborate with other stakeholders, creating a multidisciplinary response in local communities. And NCCAHT had been very active in helping coordinate those MD teams in the form of rapid response teams. In fact, Karika trained our organization way back then around rapid response team when we were forming. That was a real blast from the past, Karika. So we've all known each other in all of these things. It's important to mention, though, that a non-survivor-led movement is going to have some blind spots in identifying survivors' most important needs. Funding for emergency shelter and other things was available and provided help and still is needed. But we've learned a lot since then. So to truly contribute to survivors' well-being, they also need employment, a driver's license, reliable transportation, childcare, recovery services, peer support, court advocacy, and I could keep listing things. They need to stop being arrested and deported and marginalized. They need support and advocacy to address the child sexual abuse that they endured as children. They need to make their own choices, which includes denying services without threats or judgment. They need to feel safe and empowered. So NCCASA, to support the work that direct service providers are doing, we do our work from an intersectional social justice perspective. So we center our work on the most marginalized. So when that happens, everyone is served. And we bring this perspective into all our training, all our technical assistance, and collaboration with state and national partnerships. We recognize the impact of historical oppression on human trafficking, how it shows up and who is trafficked, equity and who can access services, and barriers to healing and well-being. Our training and technical assistance reflects the needs that rape crisis programs and other members are telling us. And also what survivors need and what they need to support those survivors. So some of our work includes the Equipping Project, which was a manual that I co-authored to help rape crisis centers support and serve survivors of human trafficking, along with brochures and a training program. And that was a specific result of the things that rape crisis programs were telling us that they needed, as they had to pick up the slack, so to speak, where other organizations were not able, that did not have the capacity to serve survivors of trafficking. Another project, we have contracted with Guilford County Public Schools to train every single faculty and staff. We also serve on the UNC Chapel Hill School Social Work Teach to Reach project team and have created a curriculum for schools. We also have created the Human Trafficking Prevention Toolkit and the Human Trafficking Curriculum Matrix. So those are some ways that we work with direct service providers to assist survivors. And that is all I have right now.
Perfect. And some of those resources for our audience will be available at the end in a couple of slides where we have resources, and we'll put those on our website and NCCASA's website as well. So some of those things that Courtney just spoke about, you'll be able to access quickly and easily. Now let's go to Karika Yarbo-Smith to say a few words about her perspective on human trafficking. Karika?
Yeah. So hi, everybody. Thanks, Courtney, for taking me back a little ways, because we have been working together for quite some time. So it's really good to really be a part of this today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess I'm going to start talking a little bit about what the Council for Women and Youth Involvement Office does, because I want to talk about how human trafficking kind of fits into our work. And so the biggest piece for the human trafficking for the Council for Women and Youth Involvement Office is we are there to really inform our governor and legislators about key issues that impact the lives of women, youth and their families in North Carolina. And so one of those ways is that we have been legislated to provide funding and some oversight and resources to our domestic violence and sexual assault programs across the state that cover all 100 counties. And so within that, one of the things that Courtney mentioned and that we really focus heavily on is the intersectionality. I think one of the things that if I was able to leave people with one thing is that I always stress that human trafficking is not this isolated thing that happens and happens in other places and happens, in this sort of I guess, isolated place. But a lot of times when we look at trafficking, it happens with domestic violence. There's often domestic violence happening with trafficking, sexual assault. There's also child abuse happening. So it's all kind of interconnected. And so if we're able to kind of look at it in this holistic way and fashion, we don't sensationalize what's happening, and we're able to really look at survivors and their needs and really identify all the parts that we need to address when it comes to not only the work that we do, but also just making sure that survivors are engaged in every portion of the work that we're doing. And so with us doing the domestic violence and sexual assault work, one of the things that we wanted to do is really look at how human trafficking intersects, but also provide training and education to our domestic violence, sexual assault grantees that we currently fund, as well as working on what are some of those needs that people see are kind of the biggest things that are just not being are addressed, or we're addressing, but we're not quite get there yet. And so one of the things that we formed back in 2017, we formed our Community Advocates Committee. And actually, Courtney's a part of that too for us. And so one of the things that committee does is we look at marginalized communities in particular, but how do we improve access to services for survivors of human trafficking, but also domestic violence and sexual assault? Because really at the end of the day, we really need to start looking at this holistically, because our programs, for instance, our domestic violence and sexual assault programs, are serving survivors of trafficking a lot of times, but they don't get the additional resources that they need in order to do that. So we definitely look at it that way. And so we have our committee. We also have our housing program. And so our housing program is really in place to kind of help improve options and increase options available for housing for survivors. But also we, over the course of time with COVID-19, we've seen a little bit different need on our end for housing. And that is because, we do have our programs, domestic violence programs who are housing survivors. And we even have some human trafficking shelters that are housing survivors. But a lot of times we've gotten calls about, families. So maybe a parent or a mother who has kids who are over the age of 10 and just really aren't appropriate to be within a shelter. So we're trying to focus on trying to find additional options in that area as well. But one of the biggest things I think outside of our training curriculum, which is what I'm going to talk about kind of last, is we also, when we're looking at marginalized communities, we have had a focus on two specific groups the last couple of years, and that is our youth, for one. We know that when youth don't have anything to do, they're oftentimes going to get, in trouble or engaged in things that maybe they shouldn't be. But when we look at our rural communities, it's not even about youth not wanting to do things. They don't have options. And so we used to go out and do trainings for about 5 years in different communities and rural communities in particular on trafficking. And what we quickly realized is that these communities couldn't really focus on human trafficking and how to help prevent it or engage the youth because they didn't have basic resources like after school programs or other things like just basic necessities that families needed within those communities, whether it's transportation, mental health services. So they didn't have a lot of that. So we kind of stepped back and tried to find a way to focus on some of those things that we saw were almost contributing factors to trafficking happening more in those communities and focus more on increasing those sort of protective factors by developing some resources or working with them on mapping out some of their current resources and figuring how we can stretch those a little bit to meet some of the need. And so we created our LEAD program. And so our LEAD program is leading, educating, advising, and developing youth. And so we do that in rural counties. And so currently we're funded to do it in 3 rural counties, and they are 14 to 17. And we do things like workshops on healthy relationships, teen dating violence, human trafficking, as well as connecting them to local businesses so that they can have employment. And working with them on things like healthy habits, anything that we feel like we have learned, whether it's through our work or just discussions with youth about how to connect them and really help them understand that there's more out there because it's very limited what they see in rural communities. So that's a part of what we do. And then our other piece was that we work a lot. We have a new grant that we work on because we work a lot with the Commission on Indian Affairs. And so with that, we are focused on helping North Carolina strengthen the response to serving Native survivors of human trafficking. And so that's a big part of what we've been working on, doing some resource mapping and really focusing on 5 particular counties that the Commission on Indian Affairs already currently had DV or domestic violence and sexual assault advocates, but then also adding human trafficking and providing some training and resource development there as well. But then finally, I know one of the biggest things that we have been focused on these last, especially during COVID, when we've been kind of in the house and working on a lot of pieces, is our CNC curriculum. So our program, Seek, Engage, and Empower North Carolina, is really, like I said, focused on marginalized communities, but we wanted to create some form of an online curriculum because I don't know about Courtney, Lala, and Nancy, and Christine, but I feel like we were running across the state all the time, providing trainings. And we just wanted to have a place that we could house information and that people could go through this online curriculum. Sometimes people don't have the ability to go to Raleigh or Charlotte or wherever to a training on human trafficking, but they could go through this self-paced web-based training on human trafficking. And so it really is an introduction to human trafficking and covers a lot of the best practices or recommended practices for serving victims and survivors of trafficking, including things like identification, collaborative service provision, also thinking about aftercare and what that looks like. for people who have exited their trafficking situation. And so it's really designed with survivors and service providers in mind, but it's free to the general public. One thing that we did do when we worked through this curriculum, we also worked on the curriculum first by engaging some survivors on a national level to talk through what it should look like. But then once we started developing, actually having a couple of survivor consultants actually go through it, and then also having our community advocates committee have time to go through it and provide feedback and input. Because even though, you know, I've been doing this work for a while and all of us at this table I don't have that perspective. So I wanted to make sure that we are very inclusive of making sure that what we produce is also inclusive of what a survivor would feel that is information that people need to know as well to strengthen their response to human trafficking. And so that's about all I have, other than to give you the website address for that curriculum, which is cnc.org. So that's SEENC.org, and you can go on and create an account and begin taking this course. But the really great thing about it is not only do you get a certificate once you complete it, but you can do it at your own pace. So you can start it today and go back to it tomorrow. It's not something you have to do all in one setting. So thanks, Maria, for having me.
Thanks, Karika. And we will have, that's one of our resources that we will put at the end of this hour. But perhaps Ava can put that website in the chat for our Facebook folks right now. Would you say that website again, Karika?
Absolutely. It is cnc.org. So that's SEENC.org.
Thanks very much. And now let me turn the floor over to Nancy Hagan. Nancy, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to speak of the work of the Human Trafficking Commission, but I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I'm following two of the premier leaders in the field here in North Carolina. As they both said, Courtney and Karika have worked in anti-human trafficking efforts in the state for the last 20 years, and none of us would be here today if it weren't for those kinds of efforts. Karika, I've gone through the curriculum. I was on the advisory committee. I came in late, I think, but it's fabulous. So I can give a testament to that too, that CNC is really a fantastic curriculum. I did want to note, as I think they both spoke to, we're in an emergent field. And so even though we say, oh, we've been doing this for a long time, well, a long time is relative. It's really the first federal legislation regarding human trafficking was passed in 2000. And North Carolina as a state has increasingly addressed human trafficking, both legislatively and through funding opportunities. As Courtney said, early on, most of the efforts were from the ground up. So there was a groundswell of interest where people began to develop a vocabulary around what was happening in their communities, what they were seeing. We may have thought previously that we may have called something exploitation or abuse or domestic violence, and really didn't have a framework for knowing or calling things for what it was, which was the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit another human being for the trafficker's purposes. And with the onset of the TVPA, which is the first federal law passed in 2000, we began to be able to address trafficking in this state as well from a legislative perspective. And initially, and you know, everybody else tell me if you think I'm off base on this, but initially, I think there was a feeling that we can legislate and sort of remand our way out of this. Like we looked at the end, the outcome. So if you heard a lot of talk about things like if we can arrest the bad guys and stop this, well, we can't. And that's an approach that's perhaps very integral and useful, and it's one stream, but we are learning as we go that that is not a survivor-led effort typically. And it is an outcome directed effort rather than an upstream preventative kind of effort. And the two need to come together, and we're working towards that now. But I did want to point out just what a commission is, and some of the work that's done at the Human Trafficking Commission. So a commission is a legislatively mandated entity that in this case is organized in order to provide leadership around human trafficking in the state. There are 15 commissioners who are named by, they're appointed, and there are 3 standing committees on the commission: public safety, public health, and legislative action, 2 ad hoc committees, which are not currently meeting. And that group exists in order, again, to promote legislation, to facilitate development of protocols and response across the state. Because it's located in the administrative office of the courts, traditionally the focus of the Human Trafficking Commission, a major focus has been around law enforcement. And so there are a number of training efforts with such things as the Justice Academy, partnering with the Justice Academy to train law enforcement around a victim-centered and trauma-informed response to human trafficking. There was just some legislative victories, if you will. One was passed in 2014, which was called the Safe Harbor Act. And it was really moved the ground in North Carolina, in that the Safe Harbor Act says that a minor in North Carolina, so anyone under the age of 18, cannot be prosecuted for prostitution. So for instance, we don't use terms like child prostitute, which you may see in the press, or even sometimes underage women. Like, what does that mean? That means the person is a child. So a child cannot consent to participate in commercial sex. They are always a victim. They cannot be prosecuted, and they should, if identified, be directed towards services that center on their developmental needs and their process. So that, I believe, is just a really big step for the state. Currently, some of the legislation that's being proposed in the present session, one is not led by the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. I think NCCASA and probably the council are involved in this. You may know that North Carolina is tied. We have the dubious distinction with Alaska of being the state that allows marriage at the youngest age in the country. So at 14, one can get married. We don't need to go into all the intricacies of the law, but at 14 or 15, by judicial order, especially if someone is pregnant, they can marry. And so there's an effort to raise the legal age of marriage to 18, which would conform with much of the country. We believe that we are becoming a destination state for folks who typically are much older and want to marry a minor. And if in that kind of marriage situation, it may be a forced marriage, it may be coercive, and it may involve human trafficking. So that's an effort that's before the legislature this year. It has widespread support. Another is to increase the ability for expunction of records. Oftentimes people who are forced into trafficking situations, who are victimized, are also forced to commit other crimes, and these records can follow them. Courtney mentioned the need for people to find employment and to really build a life once they leave their trafficking situation. That can be super hard if you have to check the box every time you apply for a job. And so there's an effort there to work on facilitating expunction of records as well. And those are just a couple of examples. I'll leave it at that. But thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Appreciate some of those more macro understanding of some of those more macro and legislative initiatives that are taking place. And now let me turn it over to Lala Appleberry, who works with the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, has another perspective on this problem in North Carolina. And let me give the floor over to Lala, please.
You know what? You would think I figured out Zoom by now and how to turn the unmute off. So sorry about that. Okay. Hi, I'm Lala. So yes, I'm a survivor of sex trafficking. When I was a minor, when I was about 16, I was in the life. Okay. So Karika had mentioned earlier some of the things, the risk factors of like rural communities. Yes, I grew up in the city up north, but I definitely had vulnerabilities that made me susceptible to being exploited, and that's this sort of the case for a lot of survivors and victims. When I got out of the life, and I was telling my story, and I was going through sort of like my rehabilitation phases. I was working with agencies and just sort of being an advocate. I hadn't quite reached this level yet. I found myself being re-traumatized. I found myself telling my story, and it was re-triggering all over. And it would be things like sometimes audience members would ask certain questions, or even my colleagues would ask certain questions or things like that. And it really comes from a place of just not knowing, not understanding. And so I'm moving to North Carolina. One of the things that we're working hard on is the survivor network. One of the things that also was sort of an issue was that sometimes folks would want survivors to come in and share their expertise and their story, but they didn't they didn't really want to compensate them as they would their counterparts, their other professional counterparts, as well as, just asking sort of questions that were just really too personal. And so we recently got funding to fund, and I want to talk about the Survivors Network because this is this three-pronged approach to helping sort of alleviate some of these things that I had to go through. And so the Survivor Network is a three-pronged approach, right? So the first piece of it is we have the New Dream Fund, and this fund is going to be for professional development in the form of things like higher education, buying books, seminars, national, local conferences for survivors, right? Because what we do know is that we have to continually invest in survivors to become leaders than to become advocates. And so we cannot do that without equipping survivors with these resources and these opportunities. And so the New Dream Fund is a place where we will use our leverage to be able to help survivors pay for some of these things that they want to do in their professional development. Another piece of the network is that we're calling it Leadership College. And this is sort of a survivor-led peer support group. And this one is where survivors are really working on personal development, newer survivors that are out of the life. So I would have benefited from being a part of programming like this, where I could learn how to tell my story in a way that wasn't re-triggering, that was also really beneficial for the people that were listening to hear, in a way that they could use what I was saying in my story to inform their practice and their other agencies they're working with. The other piece is the Speakers Bureau. So this is the largest piece that we're working on, and it's really cool actually, because I think back to when I was in the life and when I got out, I felt so lost, right? I didn't have any guidance. There wasn't all these great agencies and places where I could go and get resources and help because, then, it was not easy. Minors were being charged. It wasn't until the Safe Harbor laws came out. And so there was this piece that was really missing. And it's almost like this mentor for a mentor. So that's what the Speakers Bureau is. The Speaker Bureau is agencies that want to utilize survivor voices and they want survivors to sort of help them and guide them into an agency that's survivor centered, right? Like their practices, their work that they're doing, they want it to be survivor centered, so they want to use survivor voices. We at the network train survivors on how to do that, right? So how to tell your story in a non-triggering way, how to talk to the media, how to develop all these necessary skills to be able to take you from survivor to leader to advocate. Because that really is like the spectrum of how it happens. And so that piece also is almost like we pair up the coordinator, me for now, with the survivor, and really almost like a hand-holding thing, take them through this walk. They're ready. They're already ready to a point where they want to share their stories. It's just like, how do I do this? How do I use my lived experience to inform best practices and help the state do this work in a survivor-informed and led way? And so we are developing the network. We are, we can talk about, I think we're going to talk about this later, maybe not, but we are taking referrals and intakes right now. And so it's a work in progress, but we're working with all these agencies to make sure that, this is survivor led and survivor centered, because like Maria read in the bio, I wholeheartedly believe that it needs to be survivor led and survivor centered. And I know all the agencies on this call on this webinar, work really hard in making sure that's a reality, making sure that they're inputting survivor voices in all aspects of the programming and things that they're doing. And so we just want to continue doing that and making sure that that's a sort of a statewide thing. So thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Oh, thank you, Lala. I appreciate it. Well, so now our audience has heard a little bit from each one of our panelists about the kind of work they're doing and how it fits into a whole. And I just have a few questions. As anybody who knows me knows, I always have a few questions to ask people. And just a comment first. I think one of the things I heard from most of all of you was the importance of prevention, and how a lot of the work assisting victims and survivors of human trafficking centers around not helping people not get into, as Lala talked about, the life, and really working on prevention strategies. And the other thing which Lala made very clear and was also mentioned, I think, by everyone else, was the importance of the real work of anti-human trafficking needs to be survivor-led, survivor-centered. And so with those two comments in mind, let me throw this out to the panel for some quick responses. So I'm not a survivor. I'm deeply interested in helping mitigate the scourge of human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, which I imagine many of our audience members are. So I'm not a survivor. I want to help. What can I do? What should I do to help my community try and reduce, if not, as one of the panelists said, we can't eliminate it. I think it was Nancy. We're never going to eliminate it. We're never going to arrest our way out of the bad guys. But how do I help my community minimize the damage that sex trafficking does to my friends, my family, my community members?
I would love to take a second to answer that. I think understanding human trafficking from a public health perspective, learning to understand it, what are the risk factors, what are the protective factors, how do we build protective factors, how do we lower the risk factors. And the human trafficking prevention toolkit that we'll be sharing at the end is an excellent primer on that. It goes through all of those things from a primary prevention perspective. So, and then seeing where you fit in on all of that. So if you're a school teacher, you can be a protective factor, right? So I think just learning to look at it from that framework is extremely helpful in what you were mentioning, Maria. Thanks.
Anybody else have a thought about what our audience might do, what somebody like me could do to help mitigate and reduce human trafficking in my community?
I can build on what Courtney said, which is that I agree a public health perspective is essential, as is a human rights perspective, because this is a crime, and it is a crime that violates the dignity, humanity. It's almost designed to degrade the humanity of another human being. And so anything that we can do, much like with Women NC, to promote the human rights of everyone, especially those who are most marginalized by the majority community, be they women, women of color, folks in rural communities, people who are have disabilities, that's all important. And so when we think about how to strengthen our communities, get involved. It's that simple. Tutor at your school. I mean, primary prevention, when we're talking upstream about how to build strong communities and create opportunities for people so that they are not, Lala, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think many people, economic instability and is a factor oftentimes in human trafficking, where people are perhaps groomed, lured, recruited, or feel that they have no other option. We all need to meet our basic needs. Those include shelter, clothing, food, but also there's a basic need for love and affection. These can be manipulated readily by predators and traffickers. So anything that we can do within our own communities to build up those counterpoints to those needs, to strengthen families. I mean, if you're volunteering at a food bank, you're engaging with a community that has specific needs, and you're able to do your bit. So it doesn't have to be a primary focus. You don't need to go out and start your own agency to respond to human trafficking. Join with the efforts that are already ongoing in your community, be they HT specific or any kind of effort. Go in and read to fourth graders at school. It doesn't need to be a professional sort of activity, but there's something that all of us can do.
Lala, go ahead.
Okay, also, yes, like Nancy said, yeah, don't start another agency. There are so many really great ones. Don't do that. What I also want to add is understanding what it is and what it is not. Okay, it's super important to really sort of buckle down on this, because it is not like Pretty Woman. You know, especially domestic sex trafficking, in my experience, it looks, sometimes you can't tell, you know, you have to have a realistic picture of what it looks like. And so really educating yourself and knowing what sex trafficking and labor trafficking looks like is super important to being able to help in this movement. It's not this out of space concept that we think of. It's actually, you know, really can be right in front of our eyes, and you just may not even know what to look for, the signs, so you didn't even know that is what it was. Also, something tangible, as what everyone else is saying, is that think about your skill set. Think about what you're really good at, and then find an agency and offer to help with that. If you're really good with web development, if you're really good with fundraising, whatever you're really good at, I don't know, you do lots of skills, offer that to the agencies, because I can guarantee you that we can use those. We can use those skills. So yes, thank you.
Okay. Boy, do I have a lot of questions. Let me, before we go to our audience, throw this one out here, because we're all at home. We're all doing this Zoom call. Karika mentioned earlier how her work has been informed by being at home for more than a year. Maybe, in fact, let me throw it out to you first, Karika. So what's going on with sex trafficking this last year in the time of COVID? Can you give us like what you have seen from your experience about how it's changed or how it's remained the same, and what has COVID done to both the victims and survivors as well as the service providers? What have you seen?
Yeah, so this is a huge question, and I know everybody has something to add to it, but I would say for us, a couple things. I mean, we've had to look at how to do outreach differently. So I think, NCCASA has done this, the commission has done this, but we're all doing media outreach instead of that on the ground outreach, because we haven't been able to do as much of that in person as possible. And then also thinking, for this last year, most people have been trapped at home with their perpetrators and their abusers. And so trying to have a chance to, they don't have the options as that they normally did sometimes of going directly to school or going to work, where teachers or someone at work or someone can actually notice that something is wrong. So that's also caused another problem. Also, I think one of the things that we're seeing that's a huge issue is that because there's so much more need in COVID for resources, but our resources are even more limited during COVID. And so it's definitely been a challenge, I think, for agencies and really having to be a lot more creative. I mean, I can think about like even in one rural community that we work in, having kids having access to be able to get online for school, having to put a bus in a park with a hotspot on it so that kids could, the families could go park, in that parking lot to actually to have access to the internet, because not only did, the schools were trying to provide computers and resources, and we were able to do that a little bit too, but not having those resources already has just made the issue even worse. But then also with schools and children being online 24/7 now, it gives perpetrators this access to them that, parents might think they're doing schoolwork. You just don't know. It has definitely made it, I feel like, very difficult to even get a really good grasp on the scope of where things are, but it's definitely made it where we see a lot more need. I don't know that the need wasn't there before. It's just now we're able to see it a little bit clearer because people have been trapped at home with their perpetrators. But I also think about the fact that we know that when financial stress increases in homes, then abuse increases. And so being that COVID has been one of the biggest issues has been the financial, stress that families and people have been under. We know that now that it's also increasing things like domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking, and sexual assault. So yeah, I'll let one of the other panelists know, because I know this is a big issue for all of us right now.
Maybe what I'll do, if it's all right, is just check in with Ava Smith, who has been looking at the chat box on Facebook, just so we can get some of our audience questions in there, which might continue that conversation, if that's all right with the panel. Ava, what have you seen on the chat box? Are there questions or comments you want to highlight?
Yeah, a really great question that was posed is, how can we as a community recognize when someone is being recruited?
And panelists, feel free to kind of jump in there, and I'm sure others will have, as Karika said, their own take on the answer, and we can have a few responses.
I can briefly just share. So if someone is being recruited, others may not be able to see it because the trafficker is going to be really good at concealing that from other people. Also, one of the tactics is isolation. So they're going to isolate psychologically, physically, well, psychologically maybe first, then physically, financially create a dependency, and that will be, and then to mask what their ultimate motives are. So it will just appear to be another relationship. So it is difficult. I just wanted to mention that. I'm sure others may have really good things to say.
I'm sitting here trying to, I echo you, Courtney. I'm sitting here trying to think of how to answer that question in a way that's going to be something that for a community to do. It's hard. It's hard to tell. You know what? I don't have a good answer, except I echo you, Courtney. It's hard to tell. I think we have to be vigilant and understanding and knowing signs. There are signs if you really want to get involved in the work. There are signs, there are red flags that you can pay attention to, but ultimately it is difficult to tell.
Wow. Sorry, go right ahead.
If we see kids that are struggling, if we see anybody that they're struggling, they're in distress, we don't have to know that they might be trafficked. So let's jump in as we are able to. And really we want to practice that across the board. If we suspect something's not right with people that we know, that's our entry point, whatever the issue is, right? So thanks for letting me add that.
And let me just add something else to reiterate something Karika said that Courtney has said, and we began the conversation with, the sort of intersectionality, or if you prefer, interconnectedness of all of these issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's social isolation in young people. I'm sure Lala would have, we probably don't have time for her to talk about her own experiences there, but helping people in need is going to help reduce human trafficking. At least that's what I've heard. And to Lala's point about, so how do you do that? Do you help an agency? Do you work at the food bank? Do you tutor children? Right? There's stuff that we can do that will reduce vulnerabilities to reduce human trafficking. And each of us can do what she does best. Ava, let me go back to you and see if there are any more questions or comments that you'd like to highlight for our panelists to respond to.
Yeah, one comment that I've seen is like, how can, when somebody sees the misrepresentation of trafficking in the media, how can we as individuals maybe address that?
Call it out, right? Like, we're in the time of posting stuff on social media and highlighting all this stuff. I think one of the biggest fears, or not fears, one of the biggest things is silence, right? Like, not speaking about it, not being public, not being vocal. And we sort of need to throw that away and be really vocal about things that aren't right, the things that people aren't saying but should be saying, and things that they shouldn't be saying but they are saying, and calling it out in a loving and educational way. And that's okay. Like, we can say what we need to say in a respectful, loving, educational way, and it'd be okay. So yeah.
And that's why I'm so grateful for opportunities like today, because the other unspoken piece is keep learning and learn from reputable sources. So Maria, and Ava, the resource list that you're going to share is a clearinghouse of reputable sources around information around human trafficking, because I think it's very easy for us to self-educate through the media, be that social media, mainstream media, broadcast media, and stop there and think that we have an understanding, and then we are either moved to do something or to criticize or whatever, but we form our opinions that way. And so, again, it's opportunities like this one where we can speak to resources like this, which are evidence-based and developed with survivors and centered on survivors, and can be accessible to the public in a credible fashion. And I just want to conclude that thought by saying I'm really hopeful that some of the pain that our country has gone through in the past year and a half around structural inequities, systemic racism, all the violence, the illness. I mean, this is a pivotal moment. And so it can be seen as a chance to engage in this kind of work. We're all being called to do that. And so again, I appreciate efforts like today's, where we can have access to reliable ways to go about that learning. And it's ongoing. This is not a once and done. Human trafficking is intersectional, it's deep-rooted, it's a really difficult, complex topic. And so that we need to spend time with it to understand what it's about and then take some action.
Let me ask Ava if there is one more question or comment from the audience before we do a very quick round robin, last words from each of the panelists. Ava?
Yeah, there was a question posed on NCCASA's stream. So it says, data collection and research are another tools to prevent human trafficking. Women NC scholars have contributed multiple times with doing research and bringing their recommendations for policy change at the table. What would be the role of Women NC Leadership Training Program to help prevention of human trafficking in North Carolina?
Ooh, I think that one's directed at me. So I'll say briefly, we have a scholars program where we work with undergraduate students and pair them up with what we call femtors from RTI's Global Gender Center to examine instances of gender disparity, gender discrimination, in particular North Carolina communities. We've done this work for 11 years. We have addressed human trafficking in the past, and we will be addressing it going forward. So one of the ways that Women NC participates in this work is by allowing the public and practitioners in this world access to our research, which is done under the direction of RTI's Global Gender Center. So it's serious, data-informed research about such topics as sex trafficking and human trafficking, among many others. So I invite you to take a look at our scholars' work at our website, womennc.org, to take a look at some of the other topics, including sex trafficking, that our scholars have addressed, and the research and the findings and public policy solutions that they have suggested over time. Enough. Let me go around Robin and quick last words, whether it's a call to action or something you want our audience to know before we wrap up. Courtney, let me start with you.
I'd say let's donate to the Survivors Network with NCCAHT.
All right. Who's next?
I can go next because I was sort of okay, great. Yes, absolutely. What we need more than ever are monetary resources. And that doesn't have to be cash money. It can be gift cards. It can be sponsorships. It could be, it could be anything really, but we need unrestricted funding because as we know, and as all the panels have talked about, survivors need, there are lots and lots of needs that we just can't lump into one category. So yes, monetary resources. Wait,
Lala, how would I contribute to the Survivor Network? I don't even know how to do that. How do I do it?
Good question. So email me. We have a link on our website that you can also get more information. Oh, go ahead, Courtney. Do you have the answer to that? You're muted. Oh, there we go. Courtney put the link in the chat. So we do have a link where you can donate and just put that for the Survivor Network. Also reach out to me. I'm doing fundraising efforts right now. And so we can partner and you can learn more about how to do that.
So what I'll do is I will put Lala's email in. I'm not going to do it in chat because we're almost out of time, but we will get that information on Women NC's website, how to reach Lala and contribute to the Survivor Network if that's something you want to do. Karika, last words.
Absolutely. I think if you don't have the money to donate, because I think that's an excellent place to donate. If you don't have the money, do what Lala said before, which is also not only educate yourself, but what is your skill set, and donate that, your time, to some of these agencies that are out there doing the work, because we can use it.
And finally, Nancy, let me let you say your few words and last words.
Well, I may have already done that, but I'll just reiterate that, again, there's something that everybody can do. This is an issue that's embedded throughout our society at all stratas, all communities. We know that some people are more vulnerable than others. Again, think about what role you can play, but do that in an informed manner. So spend some thoughtful time engaging with resources and materials, learn, and then consider what approach you want to take and go for it. You can reach any one of us for further suggestions.
Wonderful. Well, we're 2 or 3 minutes over time, so I'm going to cut us all off right now and thank Courtney Dunkerton from NCCASA, Karika Yarbo-Smith from the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement, Nancy Hagan from the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, and Lala Appleberry from NCCAHT for their time, their expertise, and for helping us understand a little bit more about human trafficking in North Carolina. We look forward to future Lunch and Learns, and we'll see you on Facebook Live in the very near future. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you.